This video is going to summarize the main ideas and the processes involved in Biology Standard 3.5, which is demonstrate understanding of evolutionary processes leading to speciation. So basically we're going to focus on the ideas that result in evolution happening and also the ideas that lead to speciation happening. There's a few beautiful images on here. Look at these wonderful butterflies exhibiting mimicry, and that can lead to evolutionary pressures to allow this mimicry to happen. Some wonderful original work of Darwin's here. Darwin's finch is over there in the Galapagos. Some evolution in fishes happening over here. And this idea about the pentadactyl limb that has common features between each of the different animals, even though they have very, very different functions from each other. These videos are going to serve as an overview, a summary, a revision, but they are not going to be enough in themselves to give you detailed understanding of the processes involved. I'm going to split them up into different sections simply because otherwise it's going to get too long if I put them all together. So this first one is going to be looking at evidence for evolution. The first thing that we're going to look at is the evidence for evolution. So this is effectively underpinning all of the other areas that we're going to look at, the different ideas. And but when you're answering your questions, this should always be at the back of your mind. So what evidence is there to prove that these things have happened? We're going to go around in an anti-clockwise direction because that's just how it's happened, and we'll start with fossils. So fossils are any kind of remains that have been left behind of organisms that existed previously in a present time, and this can be things like bone structures that have become solidified and then mineralized into rocks, but it can also be things like imprints being left behind by behaviors that organisms exhibit. So for example, footprints can still be considered to be fossils, imprints left behind of shells of organisms decaying, things like that. One thing to think about is that fossils generally only form from the hard parts of animals, so this could be exoskeletons or skeletons within the body. But what that means is that beyond a certain period of life developing, you get back to the point where there are no fossils possible because they were all single-celled organisms, so no hard parts to remain behind. Fossils are involved in allowing us to trace previous forms of organisms that are still present today. So it provides us with a form of evidence that you can kind of visually see how organisms have changed. And it can also provide us with a way of looking at organisms that are no longer around today. And that allows us to form phylogenetic trees, which shows the relationship between different organisms. The next part is looking at DNA or molecular techniques or molecular evolution. This can involve things like comparing DNA sequences or comparing mitochondrial DNA sequences, but also comparing amino acids and proteins. And a good example of this would be cytochrome C, which is a highly conserved protein between many different organisms. And it is very, very similar. So there are very few amino acid changes that take place. And this is a prime example of how proteins can be conserved between different organisms, therefore showing a common point of origin between them. Biogeography is another one. So this is involved with sort of the idea that the tectonic plates have moved, continents have moved, but if you can find common evidence of organisms living on multiple different plates, then it shows that back in history a long time ago that these organisms were once from a common point of origin. A classic example of this is the ratite bird, so this is the flightless birds, and in New Zealand we have the kiwi and then the moa that is now extinct, and comparing this to ostrich and emu and other flightless birds. Comparative anatomy is another form of evidence for evolution, and this is where we are looking at structures within the organism that are similar or dissimilar. Structures that are similar are called homologous structures, and they generally means they come from a common point of origin. Classic example of this is the pentadactyl forearm or the front leg, and it's this idea that in many different animals they all have this five kind of structured organization to their forelimbs. So for example, humans, we have the 5 fingers, but in bats they will have 5 bones coming out that support that same kind of structure. Similar bones have been incorporated into legs for horses, even though they have a different structure again, and mammalian swimming creatures like dolphins and whales, they also have a very similar structure. Analogous structures is the opposite to that. So it's the idea that organisms have evolved through common environmental pressures of their particular niche. And so, for example, batwing and butterfly wing both resemble each other, but they come from very different point of origins, but they have a similar function, whereas homologous structures have similar structure but dissimilar function often. The other evidence that you could also look at is things like embryology. So this is the way that embryos develop. They're very similar, and also microevolution. So this is looking at evolution on a very small scale, for example, bacteria and antibiotic resistance. One last thing to think about too, just going back to fossils up here, is to think about the dating of fossils. So remember that fossils can either be dated in a relative manner, so that would be dating the fossils and comparing the age of those remains in relation to the rocks that are surrounding them or other events that are known to be surrounding them, or it could be absolute dating. So that's looking at things like carbon dating or potassium argon dating. So that's a very brief summary for evidence for evolution. Once again, remember, this is not enough information in itself to understand these concepts fully, but hopefully it's just pulling these ideas together for you. The next video is going to look at basically factors that bring about evolution, and that will be in part 2 of the video.